Hi, good afternoon and welcome back to the Tech23 Impact Circles. And for those new to the circles, welcome. Thank you all for joining today's conversation on a topic that is becoming increasingly prevalent in this day and age, automation in the built environment. As is custom, I would like to acknowledge both the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the Bunurong and Woiwurrung Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land where the Slatterys team meets, works and creates. We pay our respects to the elders both past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Now, today's conversation will be led by Mike Zimmerman and is joined by Matthew Barbuto, Rebecca Hanley, Juan Nieto, and Kaustubh Pandya. I'd like to make a special shout out to the Tech23 sponsors before we kick off: Transport for New South Wales, Main Sequence Cyro Innovation Fund, Oz Industry Entrepreneurs Program delivered in partnership with i4 Connect, Addison's, ASX, Ansto, Curtin University, Cicada Innovations, and Evoke AG for helping to make Tech23 happen. We thank you. Hi, Rachel. Lovely to see you here.
Hello, Adina, and hello, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you and to a special warm welcome to our contributors who are helping to make Tech23 happen. Now in its 13th year, Tech23 takes pride in celebrating Australian innovation and is all about amplifying the people and organisations chipping away at the big challenges we face. I want to thank all of those zooming in for being part of this circle, especially those that are coming from far and wide. And Mike, who's I think he's in quarantine. It's great to see you too. Please say hello and introduce yourselves in the chat. And you're welcome to ask your questions there as well. The link to the Slatterys Charter is also found in the chat, and it's a guide to the behaviour that we welcome at all of our events. There are some more Tech23 circles planned for this year, but there are so many on the website for you to visit, and some of them are just absolutely amazing. So I really encourage you to go back and look at some of those treasures. There's a very exciting thing. We've got actually a face-to-face event to look forward to in mid-December, the 15th of December in Sydney. So please keep an eye out for information on that, where the 23 will be presenting. And please note today's circle will be recorded. So just confirming, we're going to eavesdrop on what I'm sure will be a really illuminating conversation. And then we're going to move to Q&A. And then time permitting, we'll stay around afterwards to chat once we stop the recording. So I'm really honoured and really grateful to Mike. And over to you, Mike, to kick things off.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to the rest of the team at Tech23. There's no place I'd rather be, especially because I'm in hotel quarantine, as mentioned, Rachel. So no, really delighted to be with this illustrious group today. And before we kick off our topics, I just want to do a whip around so everyone gets a sense for frankly, the caliber and experience of the folks we have to have our conversation today. I'm going to go in order on my Zoom screen. So Matthew, just give us a brief overview of Ynomia and a bit of your background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, so Ynomia is into our 4th year of operations. I'm very fortunate to have been given responsibility to commercialize some IP that was developed within CSIRO, which is referred to as BLEAT, which stands for Bluetooth Low Energy Aware Tracking. We're very fortunate that the research team who invented that IP has worked with us for a lot of that journey. And we're now doing that somewhat more independently, focused on the construction industry. And this topic, I guess, is very relevant to us because most of the focus of our product development relies around automation of construction workflows and activities.
Great, thank you, Matthew. And KP, you're next on my screen, coming to us from the San Francisco Bay Area. Good evening.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, thank you again for having me. Kaustubh Pandya, I do go by KP. I'm a principal at Brick and Mortar Ventures. We invest in the built world, so going from design, construction to operations and management phase of the asset lifecycle. We invest across all verticals: single-family residential, commercial, industrial, oil and gas space, doesn't matter to us, and we invest globally. We have 3 in Australia, 2 in Europe, and a few in scattered across North America. So agnostic to geography and agnostic to business model. Today's topic is pretty exciting. We have a few plays in a few portfolio companies and plenty in deal flow. So looking forward to the conversation.
Terrific. Thanks, KP. Rebecca, you're up next. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Hi, everyone. Rebecca Hanley. I'm the Global Head of Strategy and Transformation for Laing, which is about a £4 billion engineering construction company with operations in the UK, the Middle East, and Australia. We also have an in-house tech and innovation team, which I oversee globally, focused predominantly on improving productivity, certainty, quality, safety, all the issues that construction's tackling for us in the construction industry. So it really frames against our mission, which is to be the recognized leader for innovation and excellence. Really happy to be here and looking forward to today's conversation.
Excellent. And last but definitely not least, we have Juan from CEMEX Ventures. You're coming to us from Singapore, is that right? Have I got that right?
Now it's Spain, but my base is Shanghai.
And Shanghai.
And yes, Mike, thanks a lot for having me today, and also thanks for Tech23 for arranging this. So basically, I'm part of CEMEX, is one of the largest building material groups in the world, with operations all over the Americas, in Europe, and the Middle East, and some countries in Asia. And basically, I'm coming from the Open Innovation and Corporate Venturing team. So for the past 5 years, we have been trying to identify which are the largest pain points in the construction industry along the whole construction value chain for the different stakeholders, and then trying to find which entrepreneurs, technologies, or whatever it could be, can solve those pain points. We have different ways of interacting with the startups, but the one that I'm involved in is the investment area. So basically, we have our own venture capital fund within the group, and basically we have invested so far in 16 different countries from companies from 9 different countries. So basically, this is a topic that interests us a lot, and there is several of our companies, several of our portfolio companies also tackling this issue. So very much interested and looking forward for today.
Terrific. Thank you, Juan. And for framing, we spent some time beforehand preparing, and we just want to frame up the scope of the discussion. So for the purposes today, we're going to focus, it's a massive topic, so we're going to focus in a little bit. First of all, we're going to focus in on construction in particular. So that's one thing when we talk about the built environment, where it's not as much on operations, more about the construction side of things. Then the other thing, if we look at the front end of that of our topic, it's automation. And for purposes of today's discussion, we acknowledge that getting the data right is really critical in automation. And so we're going to be talking about both digitization and automation in kind of the classical sense. So scoping, construction, and then digitization plus automation for scope. So why don't we kick off and just sort of do a level set on where we are today in terms of the level of automation, broadly defined, in the construction industry. And I guess the framing of it is maybe the most recent types of innovations and improvements, things we've seen over the last 5 years. What's changed? Does someone want to kick that off?
I'm happy to. So I think last 3 to 5 years have been particularly interesting. I would maybe categorize 3 broad types of innovation, or at least types of use cases we've seen get traction. Category 1, I would call in particular verticals of construction. So whether it's being renewables, whether you're doing EPC solar or you're doing wind farms and there's foundations, you've seen the built robotics of the world, safe AIs of the world, they've done pretty well in that space. The mining is the second vertical that we've seen, and we consider mining as a vertical across many verticals we invest in. So it's a large industry, so they're not critical, but we do think though that vertical specific innovation, I think is getting quite a bit exciting. The second one's been very use case specific. So whether it's layout robotics or we invested in drywall finishing, so very point solution task specific automation in that space. And the third one we've seen exciting wise is enabling technologies. So not necessarily automating, but there is a foundational layer that I can build on top of or enable and ease the tall order that automation brings to the world, especially in construction, which is usually data denied, data constrained, temporary workforce, temporary supply chain. So it's a lot of challenges that you need to meet to make an ROI case work for automation. So I would say those kind of the 3 buckets I can kind of think of.
I would, that resonates with us as well, I would say. I wouldn't have been able to classify them as eloquently as KP's just done, but broadly speaking, I think we've seen, particularly with COVID, it'd be interesting to hear the other people's views, but with COVID, the digital side of automation and data and trying to facilitate the remote working environment, but still maintain physical progress in construction is really accelerated because of the pandemic. Automation from the perspective of designing for manufacture and assembly or componentry-led approach to building, I actually don't think is a new thing. I think we were talking about previously that the automation of activities, be it bricklaying, be it modular components, and I think there's a link to an example of technology that was available in the 60s. I think it's more a case of the adoption curve has accelerated. So yes, there's drone and robots and things like that, but I'd say it's more the case that it's the user adoption cycle has accelerated more since COVID than actually the prevalence of the technologies. Maybe there's more being developed, but they've been around for a while. We've just been slow to adopt them, I would preface.
Yeah, I would probably add that Rebecca touched on a topical point that we're all very, very much aware of, being COVID. And what we've seen happen in the last couple of years, I think one of the most fascinating things about the next couple of years will be what persists and what falls by the wayside. And I think that idea of remote monitoring, whether it's the construction site or off-site activities, has been probably, I would say, thematically the thing that I've seen accelerate the fastest, because people physically were constrained. They couldn't go to the job site. They couldn't go to visit their supply chain partners, and therefore, out of necessity, in some ways, they had to adopt different ways of working, just like we all did in terms of adopting virtual meetings like we're doing right now. I hope that the velocity that's created and the greater awareness of what can be done without being physically in person continues. But I guess I also have some reservations that as we start to see things open up again, that perhaps the muscle memory of the industry might just revert back to type and kind of fall back to the old ways of working.
This is super interesting. If I can add my 2 cents here, we are firm believers of automation, and basically we see that it's something that's inevitable. And one of the things that Rebecca mentioned, not only because of COVID, but also because of the change of mindset that we have seen from the different stakeholders in the industry, that's something that is pushing the different ways of automation a lot. And actually, we are seeing this in 3 different, let's say, angles. So we see that it could be horizontal automation, that is something that can go across different stages of the construction value chain. But we have also seen, we are seeing more and more this vertical automation that is basically connecting different workflows and data points between different stakeholders in the industry. And this level of automation that we are seeing today is something that, since we started this 5 years ago, we have never seen something like that. So we are starting to see more and more platforms that are able to vertically integrate flows and connect the different stakeholders. So we are really excited about this topic, and it's something that we see is going to be getting a lot of traction in different regions all across the world.
It's an interesting point you raised, Juan, about the mindset. It's certainly something that is front of mind for Laing O'Rourke when we talk about the adoption, even internally. We come up with something that we know is a pain point. We absolutely want to deploy it internally. I can see Toby Buchanan from Nplan smiling there, because we have worked with Nplan as well. And people get it intellectually, but then when you ask them to adopt it on the projects, it really does require a culture change to get people to embrace that new way of working and really get the scale. Are you seeing, when you're dealing with different startups, are you seeing that fragmentation? Because I'm experiencing it within a business, but if you look at the industry, this is a very, very fragmented industry, and for digitization or automation to really sing, it requires collaboration and alignment of a lot of disparate parties to actually be comfortable to share data, actually have a more democratized platform. Are you seeing, with your experiences, that actually starting to shift? It's certainly something that I think is slow from our perspective.
This is super interesting point. So we are seeing this from 2 different perspectives. So actually, first one is having a clear return on investment. So basically, what are you saving? Then that's the best way of getting engagement from site people or office people. And second, we are seeing that solutions that are simple to understand. It doesn't used to be simple on the backend, but simple to understand and use as the ones that are getting more and more traction, because you are seeing this, we are seeing several solutions actually in Australia getting a bit of traction because they provide with local tools for like local people to build their own workflows and connect different data points. So that's something that we are seeing as gaining traction, and we are pretty excited because at the end, the first wave of like digitalization, I know it is a different topic, but the first wave of the digitalization that happened a couple of years ago, well, a couple of decades ago, of digitization of drawings, getting different data points from the site, is something that is already there. So you just need a link between those platforms, and that's the best motivation for top level managers to mandate that downstream on the waterfall and get that adoption within different site people. But I would love to get also Matthew's and KP's point on this.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll just pick up one thing which is kind of interesting and occurs to me, given the global nature of the panelists and some of the audience today, is just how there is really a different baseline in different regions. And Rebecca probably deals with this, operating with Laing O'Rourke being in many different jurisdictions. But if you kind of broke that down into areas of automation, you would find, and some of it driven by macro forces. I mean, for me, I've been fascinated. We've been focusing a lot on the UK in the last couple of years, more difficult to do from a remote perspective and not being able to be on the ground. But one of the things that has been fascinating is seeing how Brexit as a macro force, it wasn't specific to the construction industry, but given the dynamics of the labour force in the UK and a lot of those workers perhaps being sourced from Europe, if you thought of that in a US context, imagine if all of a sudden a whole chunk of your workforce became unavailable to do that work on site, and the impetus that would create behind modern methods of construction and things going off site, that perhaps the same people who used to come to a job site in the UK and do that work could do that work in a country in Europe somewhere and still manage that effectively. I think those kind of forces that are unique to regions and kind of almost override the underlying forces of driving automation.
No, it's very hard and interesting to kind of understand each stakeholder's point of view here. But at the end of the day, I do realize, so maybe I'll bifurcate a little bit. The digitalization aspect that you mentioned, I think Juan and Rebecca, you got kicked off in terms of adding workflows that connecting across stakeholders and adding value. I think that by necessity gives a little more transparency into the space. Our industry is not necessarily structured to incentivize transparency. So I think that requires a bit more buying. What is interesting is the conversation is actually easier on a physical automation scope. So this is where we see a more business model innovation, where if I have a robotics or a solutions that's doing something in the field, it's very hard to make a change in the field. But it's easier for me to own that line item and become a tech-enabled contractor. So I'm no longer selling you the robot or renting the robot. I'm just going to do that work for you. Does it matter if I do it with a robot or your traditional methods? I think that becomes a little easier in that space. So in some ways, it's interesting to see which one is easier to get traction and reps under the belt, or at least get a wedge. But both of them have to meet that very hard bar of project-specific ROI. You need to earn your stripes on a given project. You can't earn it on the company level. So I think that requires change management, no matter where you're going to go. I think it's just going to be a very different approach in this space.
Are there challenges, when you have innovation like the types you're talking about, where there's now more visibility, maybe better data, that and automation, that's ultimately translating to cost efficiency, and fewer mistakes, and maybe faster execution. Are there many challenges in figuring out how to divide up that pie of who gets the benefit across stakeholders, or is that pretty clear? Maybe the party that's bringing the solution to the table is the one that captures most of that.
I think there's perhaps something that comes even before that of who's paying for it. and that would be probably one of the things I find can be a significant friction point between, you know, the owner, the general contractor, or the subcontractors. And sometimes, you know, it's kind of like the immediacy, like what KP mentioned before, that, you know, the time cycle of a project and the need or the desire to deliver a positive ROI on a project, and maybe even some of the things that are already set in place. So the contractual nature of construction means that who benefits from a particular initiative is probably already written into contracts before the initiative perhaps even goes into the field. And sometimes that can mean that the incentives aren't actually aligned, because the party who might be most inclined to adopt that new technology and to drive it through and I guess minimize the friction, they might not have the financial benefit from that, and therefore they might be disincentivized in other ways. So I think the different, those interrelationships of the contract and the sequencing or timing, like if you can get out ahead of the contractual phase of when those things are done, or when those things are agreed, or what's been committed to from each of those different stakeholders, that's a really important part of, I guess, making sure the pie does get carved up in the right way, both in terms of who's funding it, but then who's benefiting from it financially.
That resonates. I think also it comes back to the nature of the industry is it's still evolving in terms of, if you compared construction with oil and gas or aerospace, or even mining, we're behind, quite frankly, both in terms of our practices, but also in terms of how we engage or contractually with other parties. So the concept of collaboration to advance some kind of solution, be it automation, digital, whatever that is not something that comes naturally to our industry. It's more adversarial than collegiate at the moment. I'm sad to say, and we're trying to move into a partnership space where you can actually say, if you adopt this technology and we share the benefits, everybody wins and we advance the industry, and that's better overall. But not everyone has that mindset, unfortunately, yet. So we've got some way to go, both in terms of the contracts mechanisms, but also the mindsets. We've got to try and build trust along that fragmented industry supply chain.
Is it where have you seen it work, Rebecca? Where people are more collaborative? Is it literally down to, you know, firm and culture, or is it certain markets, or maybe certain types of kind of industries? Or
so in terms of where I've seen it work from our personal experience, it was the Prescient, or the AI tool that we spun out with Main Sequence, Mike, where it's an AI technology to improve human moving plant interface, to actually improve health and safety on site, save lives and stop people from hurting themselves. And we ended up just saying, look, this is something that is about people's lives, so let's democratize it and share it around the industry. And we actually found selling it externally whilst we waited for our projects to be able to come up the adoption curve was the way that we actually got to commercialize the product. So we encouraged our competitors to engage directly with that business to improve the well-being of their own site. And they were able to get their heads around it because it's about health and safety. So if it's something close to people's heart, I think that is easier. In terms of other spaces where people are more collaborative, I think it helps if you have the market power. So if you take aerospace, incredibly collaborative or integrated supply chain, but you have two very dominant players who are setting the rules of the game, and people then comply. We don't quite have that in construction, so that's challenging. I don't know whether my colleagues have any other examples of where they've seen it work well.
I think it's so my view is a near-term view and a kind of long-term view, kind of how that pie gets divided. At the end of the day, if you look at any other industry, as Rebecca was already mentioning, right? I think technology will create a pie, and a lot of that value will end up going to the customer, the end customer. Now, the speed at which that pie gets transferred, in my mind, will depend on which vertical you're in, what the contract structure and incentives look like in that space. So I think each will evolve at their own pace, and I don't know if you'll ever get to the same size of pie that ends up going to a customer. And in this case, the customer is the owner, which, by the way, is unfortunate because many owners who see all this amazing technology that's being in construction immediately turn to the contractor and say, well, you're clearly doing this cheaper, faster, better. Where's the benefit that I'm getting? Which is a pretty unfortunate conversation to have, because it's not actually realizing that value immediately. It's a pretty long journey to get that value. First to realize within the contractor, then it becomes table stakes, and eventually, hopefully, gets to the owner at some point. So I think that the near-term value is, I think, as Rebecca mentioned, there's certain parts where we have seen collaborative structures where let's create a joint technology space. Haven't seen it work out in a full feedback cycle where someone has tried it and done it again and again. That yes, it was a positive experience, and I'm gonna do it again and again. But we've definitely seen more, darts on the board on that space.
Yeah, and if I can add, yeah, sorry, Mike. From a supplier perspective, actually, we would love to have more use cases like the one that you just said, Rebecca. So actually, we are seeing a lot of opportunities of cooperation, and for that cooperation, obviously, this cultural result and change of mindset is needed, but there is tons of opportunities on supply chain and automation. So basically, all the parties, so we all know the level of fragmentation of the industry. So having more visibility on where a material is going to get into a site, how you can manage that material on a site, so the site handling and whatever, all the way until the installation, is something that benefits all the stakeholders on that supply chain. So how you are able to put solutions out there that can easily integrate with others and provide value to different stakeholders. And that's something that is really difficult to find in the industry. And probably what you guys, both of you mentioned, KP and Rebecca, this contractual change that is needed, is something that we'll see more and more, because we're seeing really innovative ways of approaching new projects. And that's probably something that is going to motivate a lot different stakeholders to share technologies and adopt technologies together.
Just picking up on that point there, Juan, with motivations, I wondered if people could share what they see as the top drivers of adoption today. So what are the big pain points that people are trying to solve? Maybe, top couple thoughts there. And I guess where I was coming from is we talked about safety, Rebecca, with Prescient as one example. Juan, you talked about better visibility. There's obviously cost improvement. So I guess maybe people could share some specific pain points, and then what are the drivers for solving those issues?
So we tend to focus on 4 areas. So we'll invest or collaborate on technologies that either materially enhance safety, as I was talking about, productivity. And when we talk about productivity, it can be the cost or the schedule component, or the quality, because any one of those actually impacts negatively. Certainty, which is something that is not delivered in this industry. And then something we put in there is to say something that actually allows us to create a differentiated position in our priority sectors. So something that appeals, for example, to our clients. So for example, we have a product set we've been investing in healthcare that allows a hospital that traditionally would be built in 4 or 5 years to be built in under 2 years, because of the componentry and the technology that we're putting into the build approach. So something like that is differentiated in a sector that we choose to target. So they're our main areas of focus, but particular focus on certainty and productivity are big themes in our sector.
I will say that our focus are pretty much like those, and I will be really interested in looking into that interesting new method of construction for hospitals. But I will only add one that for us as a supplier is a key priority, is how we can bring sustainability to our products, and also how we can meet our customers' increasing demand. So basically what we are seeing is, depending a lot on the region, some of our customers don't even know what to ask in terms of, let's say, enhanced product with better performance, with less embodied carbon and whatever. So we are doing a lot of effort to catch up with the different demands that are growing, first thanks to COVID, but also thanks to this change of mindset that everyone is having lately in the past couple of years. So it's just adding to all of those sustainability, both from a material perspective, but also from a supply chain perspective. So reducing waste, all the material left over, how you can promote circularity, how you can reuse and try to reduce landfilling at all. That's something that is a key priority as well for us.
Yeah, I would concur with the way that Rebecca framed that, and Juan, I guess, conferred with. I'm a big sports fan, so I probably tend to think of it more in offense and defense. And I would say that the part that Rebecca talked to at the end of how do you win more work? How do you enhance your USP? How do you differentiate? That's kind of like the offense category, where I think there's definitely demand in the market for ways to differentiate to win more work, and that sort of is a category almost of application in itself. And then the defense part of it is that, as we probably mostly know, construction projects for the most part start under pressure, because often they've been won in a competitive tender situation. There's been trade-offs and sacrifices and concessions that have been made to win the job. And then there's a lot of kind of reverse engineering to try and find a way to make it be profitable, and I guess to minimize the risk. And so that risk is across a multitude of different factors, productivity and safety being probably the two key ones that are most front of mind, I guess, at that point in the life of a project.
Great. KP, anything to add there?
I think you guys covered it well. At the end of the day, I think this is we view it more in terms of, is the pain point something an industry is motivated to solve? And when we think about industry motivated to solve, yes, we look at kind of our stakeholders that are friendlies, LPs, but broadly, is this a pain point that is crucial enough that it deserves a venture backable solution? Right? From an investment standpoint, you might see a solution that is fantastic to solve that problem, but not a venture backable bet. So there is a secondary scope that we tend to look at. I think the exciting part was the new methods of construction that Juan mentioned, right? So I think when we coming back to kind of robotics and automation, greenfield opportunity in that space. I think we were talking earlier, Rebecca was mentioning the brick example, which you definitely should bring that to light. How do you automate something that we've been doing something forever, or do we rethink a way from ground up if we have the access to technology that we are able to deploy in the field? I think that's a pretty good one, but I'll let Rebecca share if you have time on that one. That may be that's kind of how I thought about it, which there's a lot of excitement on the new methods and new materials for that scope.
It's a non-engineer's approach to engineering, which you can imagine my engineering colleagues don't always appreciate.
One of the things that's been creeping into my head is what you're just alluding to, KP, is that as investors, and I guess three of the group here are investors, although obviously Laing make investments as well. The typical mode of operations for us is to look for the moonshot, which is the radical founder who wants to change the world and created a huge company out of it. And yet I think we're hearing here that we probably have enough structural issues where it's pretty hard to do moonshot thinking or blue sky adoption of technology in the sector. So I'll put you guys on the spot as investors. Is how do you think about that trade-off between kind of the radical huge opportunity versus something that you think is a better chance, that's more incremental but has a better chance of getting adopted? Juan, KP?
Yeah, this is a discussion that we often have internally. So, and this is my personal opinion, but basically the way I look at it is, okay, we like a radical and long-term vision that can support a short-term strategy that is solving a specific pain point. So basically having a bit of both. So having that long-term vision that is someone who actually is hungry enough to solve that pain point until the end and connect the different dots along that path. But being solving a specific pain point is something that is mandatory to us. So we have seen, KP was mentioning that the previous question, but basically we have seen solutions out there that are pretty great in terms of product, but sometimes they forget that in which stage of innovation or digitalization or automation the construction industry is, and then they forget about the pain point itself. So having that pain point mindset is something that we like a lot. And we look after founders who are following that vision as well.
Yeah, happy to chime in. I think you hit on the head, right? At the end of the day, this is one of those, we've seen really good talent come into the space, right? So I think we should celebrate that. I think our first wave of entrepreneurs were primarily from industry, which we have done amazing work for the industry. But I think one of the second wave that we're seeing is topical experts. So roboticists, AI experts who are now coming in the industry, learning about the pain points, and then applying their best talents to create a solution that meets the needs of the industry. And that's been super exciting. I think they do have a moonshot angle. They do see that we're going to capture a good chunk of the space. The journey to get there is the hard part. So the project-specific ROI down to a single use case, I think you're balancing to say, yes, you're able to get this today. Is this use case a big enough use case for you to exist as a company? Or are you going to need a second, third, fourth act for you to be a venture backable act? And does this first use case give you the knowledge and experience to earn on your job site? Because you're not going to earn that in the lab to get that second, third act or pave the way for the second, third act. So that may be another way to look at it. So either A, yes, it's big enough and you're going to be a moonshot on the single use case, or you have a really good path to accelerate or evolve to other use cases long term.
And Rebecca, your lab, I was going to ask you about, sorry, feel free to say what you're going to say, but also can you comment, since you guys have a lab with, dozens, if not scores of engineers and researchers there, how are you looking at what you invest in terms of kind of long-term, short-term, and making that trade-off between adaptability versus disruptiveness?
I was going to put the question back to you, Mike, but yeah, I can answer.
Yeah,
I can answer the question, and then you could say how main sequence tends to look at it. But I was going to say the investors on the panel, your ability to see a future and actually hold the nerve with a longer term horizon is so important for constructors who are stuck with the status quo and trying to balance the needs for value today, but knowing that the innovation tomorrow will need to come. So we've had examples. We tend to operate on the classic 3 horizons, and we'll say 20% is horizon 3, and that's play space for our team. And actually recently we've carved out specifically an ecosystem team to go and scout the market for emerging technologies, people playing their academia, whatever it is, so that we can be alert to what's actually evolving in the market whilst we focus on the horizon 1 and 2 factors where it's easier for us to get a pull from the internal business. But that the braver amongst us, I'll say, who are actually really willing to go out there and have the vision for where that could go, the Elon Musks of the world, it's so important for us to actually get there. Because timing, we have a good example that's sort of it's urban legend in our business. We created and you're familiar with it, Mike, a 3D wax printing technology that it basically premised on printing a 3D wax mold for facades to facilitate a speedier creation of bespoke concrete facades. And the beauty was that you could remelt the wax. And so it was recyclable in that sense. And it was all digitized. So if you broke a mold, you didn't have to go and construct a new one. You just printed it, Bob's your uncle, and it was done again. We took so long to try and get adoption within the business. It wasn't the right time to try and convince our current builders to adopt it until the Crossrail project over in London was suffering time delays. And they said, we remember you talked to us about something about that a few years ago. And we actually ended up deploying it earlier than we should have, probably more immature than we should have, because we just culturally, internally, are dealing with such internal challenges. And Andrew Harris, who was leader of that role, that project, he really sponsored it and still does, was convinced it was the right technology just at the wrong time. And there's only so many of those that live operators can afford to back. We have to spend 80% of our time on the horizon 1 and 2 because we need the returns to then fund those future tech. Anyway, Mike, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I would probably just add, I am also an investor in construction technology, not at the scale that perhaps the other panelists are, but I guess I spend a lot of my time talking to other founders of construction technology companies. So in that way, I think if you're sort of like standing at the bottom of the mountain looking up, it is a very difficult sector. And if you kind of contrast that with founders in other verticals, like, fintech would be one example, where I have a couple of peers who started companies around the same time as we did, and have already had IPOs and had some pretty significant velocity. I think KP can probably talk to it specifically, because within Brick and Mortar's portfolio was, I think, probably the company who did that fastest, being PlanGrid in this space. But if you look at the rest of it, and as venture investors, you have a time scale in mind, the two really big winners, if you like, between Aconex and Procore, that's 20 years in the making. And the returns are amazing, but that's well beyond the cycles of a traditional venture capital fund. And so I think what you see now is that I'm not sure what's in Brick and Mortar's deal flow, but I presume like it's probably, there's thousands of really small companies that have maybe raised some seed capital, or maybe got to Series A, but there's almost like this massive chasm where only a handful of companies have really ever got past that in construction technology. Those who have delivered great returns, but I don't know what the rest of the panel thinks about that in terms of how long a time scale you need to have. Like, what would be a moonshot in some other industry, I think isn't necessarily a moonshot here. I mean, both Procore and Aconex started as document management. Like, that maybe was a moonshot 20 years ago when cloud computing wasn't a thing. But yeah, I think the idea of a moonshot in this space is probably a little bit different to what it would be in other verticals.
A really good point, Matt. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a second part of the velocity and exit potential here, right? So many exits, and I would say majority of the exits within construction tech have been strategic acquisitions, minus Procore, and if you count Aconex's kind of public listing and whatnot. But strategic exits, I would say, for a venture fund are good exits, not great exits. In that, yes, if you're, and it's particularly because of the point you just made, which is the moment you hit escape velocity, there are enough strategics around the table that are willing to write a check for some pretty substantial value, which make it a great exit. But for amazing venture returns compared to other industries, that velocity you can still have, keep going. So the chasm that you say, that yes, you have, and the bottom line here is we're a fragmented ecosystem serving a fragmented industry. So it's very easy to get pilots. Everyone can get pilots. I think going from pilot to scale is hard. And navigating for a GC to go from pilot to scale is even harder, because it's hard to navigate. It's our full-time job, and it takes every part of it to understand what are the differentiations between the startups. Let alone let a GC figure that out and say, hey, I'm going to bet my horse on this particular one, on this project, and lessons learned, and maybe scale it across the company. So I think that journey to go from 0 to 1 million to 5 million revenue is hard, but you can count on probably one, at most two hands, the amount of companies that have had double-digit million revenue in ARR in our industry, and that actually is hitting that escape velocity. So I think that the moonshot is maybe not let's build billion, $50 billion companies, but can we just get enough of the companies past that scope, and what will it take to get there? So I'll pause, because it's I don't know if I made a point or just babbled.
Always making a good point, KP. But I wanted to make sure we finish the sort of formal discussion on more of an upbeat note, rather than talking about the various friction points and kind of incremental improvements and things like that. And there were two ways I was thinking about it. First is if you could remove the barriers that we're talking about, like the different interests that are at work and the conflicts there, or whatever kind of friction points you can imagine, where do you think the biggest opportunities are for long-term value creation in the industry? So again, you could kind of wave your wand and change behaviors, remove conflicts, things like that, but you just see a problem that needs to be solved that could be transformational. Any thoughts there?
I've got two. Magic wand, I think, is what we naturally all go to, which is the democratization of data sharing, such that you have an integrated view from end to end on a project, and all parties are just reading one source of truth. and it facilitates collaboration and very clear view of where you are, what the status of the project is. That's the most fundamental cause of defects, conflict, delays, you name it. That's one of the biggest issues. The second one for me is I guess coming back to KP's point around me being the non-engineer in an engineering industry. I think one of the fundamental ways that construction is going to improve or be a future value creator is to fundamentally challenge the traditional ways that we have built or do build today. At the moment, we have a mindset of taking the processes and approach that we've built over hundreds of years for valid reasons. There's lots of people and structural engineers that would tell me there's reasons why it needs to be built that way. But I actually think if you adopt the Elon Musk version of how he actually then with a white page said, I want to build a car that's going to be a battery. Why does it need to have the three components? Why don't I actually just injection mold my chassis rather than actually creating it the way with all the rivets of the other ones? If someone can tackle that in construction, I think they will unlock more value than anyone ever imagined was possible in this industry. We still haven't got there yet. We're still automating incrementally what we've done for hundreds of years.
Great. Excellent. All right. Put you other guys on the spot. What do you think?
I can add something, and actually I couldn't be more agree. We need more of what Rebecca just mentioned, but also we're really excited now with this point that we mentioned already, is supply chain itself. We are seeing a lot of lack of coordination in the industry. So basically, I would love to personally see more solutions that are able to kind of like, let's say, provide value to different stakeholders at a time, and either within logistics coordination, site handling, material tracking, or also from the supplier side. So how we can, let's say, provide with better delivery options for contractors like Laing and the likes, but also be able to manage more efficiently your fleets. So all solutions that can, let's say, tackle different stakeholders at a time on supply chain is something that we are really excited about. There is really few out there, but we are seeing more and more, and hopefully there is more coming in the next couple of years.
Terrific.
Yeah, I would,
Matthew. Yeah,
I would probably say, and I know this is maybe something that will get mixed reviews because it's a buzzword, but I think digital twin is the connecting piece that what Rebecca was just talking to about, where like there has to be an impetus. There's a reason why the industry operates on siloed data, because that's just the way it's kind of been. Like Rebecca said, I think there has to be some sort of a leapfrog or transformational technology that gives a reason why all the data should feed to one place, because that is a live digital representation of the status of the project as it's being constructed, both the supply chain, so what's happening in the supply chain as it relates to the job site, and then what's happening on the job site itself. I think there's enough really smart people and enough money going into that space that could be a genuine transformation of the industry. And I think it also ties back to the other kind of the elephant in the room, is that, you know, we need to get better, but we also need to stop impacting the environment to the extent that we are. And if there's one thing that I guess everyone in this audience and in this industry should care about, it's that, because we are not great contributors as a construction industry to the challenges that the environment has. And I think if we can address that and start to become a more positive contributor, not only will that transform our industry construction, but it'll actually make us a better, you know, corporate citizen and value-adding member of society.
Well said.
KP.
Yeah, no, happy to chime in. I think that
Your sound's gone a little bit, KP.
Oh, I think my headphones died. Hold on one second. Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I do think Rebecca and Matt, you guys hit it on a great note, which is data transparency definitely will be amazing. I think if I think about reinventing from ground up, as Rebecca, you were talking about kind of the Elon Musk scope. I think there are verticals in our space where a single legal entity could deliver the entire product. So this is where I think we're talking about vertical integration. We've seen that space play out in certain certain cases. There are lots of lessons learned. I don't think it can be done. And I think there are other verticals where a single legal entity will not be able to deliver that, and we will see it be vertical efficiency. So how do you enable both those models in each vertical such that you are able to reinvent? Because I think the part of the challenge is not owning the truth or not talking from the same data points, is because you will have many different stakeholders involved who are not necessarily incentivized to share data or even align to deliver the project the right way. So if I can have them at least under the same scope and vertical integrate in some cases, yes, there's some lessons learned from previous aspects, but I do think that holds promise. So I'll leave it at that, and we can chat about kind of where we've seen that work out, at least in the simple scopes of single family residential today.
Great. I was going to say, I'll kind of pick up on Matthew's theme, and I was going to say, I think the opportunity for lower emissions materials and basically just pulling, I mean, sustainability is kind of now getting infused into everything, but I think, and Juan, you guys must think about this a lot, but the opportunity for greener and cleaner materials is a huge opportunity. Has all sorts of challenges, of course, all the way through the supply chain. But in terms of transformative, I think for me that's a big one that hasn't been talked about. Just seeing, I think we're up about, what are we, about 450 right now. So does one of the Slats folks, what's our timing look like? Rachel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we might. It's been so interesting, but in the interest of time and the fact that we've got international visitors on this Zoom, we're very grateful for them making the time, and everyone with families probably trying to stay quiet in the background. So I just want to thank all the contributors. We might stop the recording now, and then if people want to stay on the line to ask any questions, come off mute or show their faces, that would be great.